Before we begin this story, I want you to imagine something for a moment. Imagine finding an old photograph of yourself as a child. A picture taken before life became complicated. Look closely at that child's face, the curiosity in their eyes, the quiet hope about the future. Now ask yourself one simple question. What happened to that child? When did their dreams become smaller, their voice quieter, their world more careful? Tonight, I want to share a story about someone who asked that question and discovered that the person they had been searching for all along was still quietly waiting inside them. So take a deep breath, relax, and let's begin. Hello, and thank you for being here today. Before this story truly begins, I want you to imagine something simple. Imagine a quiet evening after a long day. The room is calm and peaceful. The lights are soft, and outside the window, the world continues moving just as it always does. Cars pass on distant streets, people finish their routines, and life goes on with its usual rhythm. But inside your room, everything feels still. In moments like this, something interesting often happens. When life becomes quiet enough, our thoughts begin to speak. The mind slows down, the noise fades, and suddenly the questions we usually avoid begin to rise gently to the surface. For most of my life, I avoided those quiet moments. My name is Daniel, and for many years I lived in a way that looked completely normal from the outside. I worked, I met friends, I paid bills, and I moved through life the way most adults do. My days were structured and responsible. I woke up early, prepared for work, and stepped into a world that valued productivity and routine. If someone had asked me whether I was doing well, I probably would have smiled and said yes without hesitation. In many ways, my life seemed stable and successful. I had a steady job, a comfortable place to live, and people around me who believed I was doing just fine. But the truth was more complicated than that simple answer. Inside me, there was always a quiet feeling that something important was missing. It was not dramatic sadness, and it was not the kind of pain that makes people cry in public or speak openly about their struggles. Instead, it felt like a small, empty space somewhere deep inside my chest. It was subtle, almost invisible, like a faint echo that only appeared in certain moments. Most of the time, I ignored it, convincing myself that this feeling was simply part of being an adult. Like many people, I believed that growing older meant accepting certain realities. We grow up, we become responsible, and slowly we stop asking the big questions that once felt natural when we were young. Questions like, what truly makes me happy? What kind of life do I actually want? Who am I when I am not trying to meet other people's expectations? When I was younger, I used to ask those questions often. They appeared naturally in my mind, as if curiosity itself was guiding my thoughts. But as the years passed, something changed. I became practical people, I believed. Do not spend too much time wondering about meaning or purpose. They focus on stability. They build routines. They move forward step by step without questioning the direction too much. Practical people wake up, go to work, solve problems, and keep life organized. And so I did exactly that. My life followed a predictable rhythm. Every morning I woke up early, prepared for work, and stepped into a world full of deadlines and responsibilities. My days were busy and structured. Meetings filled my schedule. Emails demanded responses, and tasks waited patiently to be completed. Conversations with coworkers, plans with friends, and small daily obligations kept my mind occupied from morning until evening. When the day finally ended, I returned home feeling tired but productive. Sometimes I cooked dinner, sometimes I watched television, and sometimes I scrolled through my phone without really thinking about anything at all. From the outside, everything looked successful and stable. Yet sometimes, late at night, when the noise of the day disappeared and the apartment became quiet, that same empty feeling returned. It arrived softly, almost like a whisper. In those quiet moments, I often found myself wondering why there was no single moment that caused this feeling, no major tragedy, no obvious failure. My life had been relatively stable, even fortunate in many ways, and yet something inside me felt distant, as if part of myself had slowly drifted away over the years without me noticing. It was as if I had built a life that worked well on paper, but somehow did not fully belong to me for years. I never tried to understand that feeling. Instead, I stayed busy. Busyness is one of the easiest ways to avoid uncomfortable questions. When your schedule is full, there is very little time left for reflection. The mind moves quickly from one task to another, and the deeper parts of ourselves remain quiet beneath the surface. But life has a strange and gentle way of slowing us down eventually, and when that happens, the questions we once avoided often return. For me, that moment came on an ordinary Sunday afternoon. I had nothing special planned that day. No meetings, no responsibilities, and no urgent tasks waiting for my attention. The weather was calm, and sunlight quietly filled the living room of my small apartment. Dust floated slowly through the warm light near the window, and the peaceful atmosphere made the day feel unusually still. With nothing pressing to do, I decided to clean. Cleaning has always been strangely relaxing for me. It gives the mind something simple to focus on, one drawer at a time, one shelf at a time. There is a quiet satisfaction in organizing small pieces of life that have been forgotten or ignored. While organizing an old cabinet near my desk, I found a small box I had not opened in years. The box was slightly dusty, and for a moment I hesitated before opening it, unsure what memories might be inside. Inside the box were several objects from earlier parts of my life. Old notebooks filled with handwriting I barely recognized. Ticket stubs from trips I had taken long ago. Letters from friends I had not spoken to in many years. Each item carried a small piece of my past, like fragments of a story I had once lived but no longer remembered clearly. And at the very bottom of the box, there was a photograph. It was a picture of me when I was about 8 years old. In the photograph, I was standing in a park on a bright afternoon, wearing a blue jacket that looked slightly too large for my small frame. My hair was messy in the careless way children's hair often is, and in my hands I was holding a small toy airplane as if it were something incredibly important. But what caught my attention was not the jacket or the toy, it was my expression. The child in that photograph looked curious. His eyes were wide open and full of something I had not seen in my own reflection for a very long time. Hope. I slowly sat down on the floor and stared at that photograph longer than I expected. Minutes passed without me noticing. For a moment, it felt as if I were looking at a completely different person, someone who lived in a different world. That boy seemed full of questions about life. He looked like someone who believed the future was full of possibilities. Someone who believed the world was wide and exciting and waiting to be explored. And suddenly, I wondered something that had never crossed my mind before. What happened to him? Where did that version of me go? The question stayed with me for the rest of the day, quietly echoing in my thoughts long after the sunlight faded from the room. That evening, I placed the photograph carefully on my desk. At first, I thought it would simply be a small reminder of childhood, nothing more. Just another object from the past that might make me smile occasionally before I returned to the routines of daily life. But over the next few days, something unexpected happened. I kept looking at it. Every morning before leaving for work, my eyes paused on that image for a few seconds. It was almost automatic, as if my mind needed to check that the photograph was still there. And each time I looked at it, the same quiet thought appeared in my mind. That boy believed life would be an adventure. Somewhere along the way, I had stopped believing that. The realization felt strange. It was not exactly painful, but it was uncomfortable, like discovering something important that had been quietly hidden for many years. The photograph did not accuse me of anything, yet it seemed to ask questions I had not allowed myself to consider for a very long time. Each glance at that image brought a subtle wave of reflection, as if a door inside my mind had opened and old memories were slowly stepping back into the light. I began remembering small details from my childhood. I remembered how fascinated I used to be by airplanes. When I was young, I would lie on the grass in the park and watch them pass across the sky, their silver shapes moving slowly through the clouds. I imagined where they might be going, what distant cities they might be visiting, and what stories were waiting for the people inside them. In my imagination, every airplane represented a new possibility. I dreamed about traveling to distant countries, meeting people whose lives were completely different from mine, and hearing languages that sounded mysterious and beautiful. Back then, the world felt enormous and full of possibility. Every corner of the planet seemed like an invitation to explore something new. But as I grew older, those dreams slowly became quieter. They did not disappear completely, but they faded into the background of my life, replaced by more practical concerns. School encouraged practical goals. Teachers spoke about stable careers, predictable paths, and responsible choices. Family encouraged stability as well, reminding me that security was important and that life required careful planning. Society itself seemed to reward people who followed safe directions, people who chose certainty over curiosity. None of those influences were wrong. In fact, they were often wise and well-intentioned. But gradually, almost without noticing it, the curious child inside me learned to become a careful adult. Careful adults do not take unnecessary risks. Careful adults choose predictable paths that promise stability. Careful adults avoid uncertainty whenever possible. Without realizing it, I had built my entire life around those ideas. My decisions were guided by logic, practicality, and safety, and for many years that seemed like the responsible way to live. And yet the photograph on my desk kept asking the same silent question: is this the life you truly wanted? One evening after work, feeling unusually thoughtful, I decided to take a walk. The park near my apartment was quiet at that hour. A few people walked their dogs along the narrow paths, and the sky slowly changed colors as the sun disappeared behind the buildings. The air felt calm, and the fading light gave the park a peaceful atmosphere that invited reflection. As I walked slowly along the path, my thoughts returned again to that photograph on my desk. The image of the curious 8-year-old boy seemed unusually vivid in my mind. And another question appeared, one that felt slightly more personal than the first. If that younger version of me could see my life now, what would he think? Would he be proud of the person I had become? Would he be surprised by how different life had turned out from what he imagined? Or would he quietly wonder why I had stopped chasing the things that once excited me so deeply? That thought stayed with me for the rest of the week. It followed me through ordinary moments, while sitting at my desk at work, while waiting for the train, while making coffee in the morning. Something inside me had begun to wake up. Something small but persistent, curiosity. For many years, curiosity had slowly been replaced by responsibility. Responsibility filled my schedule, organized my priorities, and shaped my decisions. But now curiosity was returning, slowly and gently, like a voice that had been waiting patiently to be heard again. I started noticing how often fear shaped my decisions. Fear of failure, fear of embarrassment, fear of making the wrong choice. Fear had quietly become my advisor in almost every situation. Whenever a new idea appeared, fear immediately examined it and explained why it might not be safe or practical. And yet, when I looked again at that photograph, I realized something interesting. Children rarely make decisions based on fear. They explore. They experiment. They ask questions about everything they see. They move through the world with a sense of wonder that allows them to discover things adults often overlook somewhere between childhood and adulthood. Many of us trade curiosity for safety. We slowly replace exploration with caution and possibility with predictability. And maybe that trade costs more than we realize. That night, feeling thoughtful, I opened my notebook and wrote a simple question at the top of a blank page. If fear disappeared for 1 year, what would I try? At first, the page stayed empty. I stared at the question for several minutes, unsure how to answer it honestly. But slowly, ideas began appearing, almost as if they had been waiting for permission to exist. Travel somewhere alone. Learn a new language. Speak to people from different cultures. Write stories that had been quietly forming in my mind for years. Start something creative without worrying about whether it would succeed. As I continued writing, the list grew longer. What surprised me most was how possible these dreams actually were. None of them were unrealistic or impossible. They were simply things I had postponed for years. Things I had quietly placed in the category of maybe someday. And as I looked at that list, something inside me shifted. The life I wanted was not unreachable. It had simply been waiting for my courage. The first step I took was small, almost surprisingly small, compared to the questions that had been growing in my mind. I decided to join an online English conversation group. At first, the idea seemed simple enough, but for me it carried a quiet sense of challenge. For many years, I had studied English in school like most students do. I memorized vocabulary lists, practiced grammar exercises, and read passages from textbooks. But despite all those years of studying, I rarely used English in real conversations. Speaking another language always felt intimidating. I worried about grammar mistakes, pronunciation errors, and those uncomfortable moments when my mind suddenly went blank and I could not find the right word. Because of that fear, I often avoided situations where I might need to speak. But that night, as I sat with my notebook open in front of me, I remembered the question I had written only a few days earlier. If fear disappeared for 1 year, what would I try? The question was simple, yet it carried an unexpected power. It forced me to look at my decisions in a different way. Instead of asking what was safe or comfortable, I began asking what I truly wanted to experience. And somewhere on that list of possibilities was something I had postponed for years, using English to connect with people beyond my familiar world, so I signed up. The first meeting felt uncomfortable in a way that was both exciting and nerve-wracking. When I opened the online meeting room, I saw faces from different parts of the world appearing on the screen one by one. Some participants seemed relaxed and confident. They spoke quickly and easily, as if English had always been natural for them. Others looked more like me, quietly observing the conversation and searching carefully for words before speaking. When it was finally my turn to introduce myself, my heart began to beat faster. I could feel a small wave of nervousness moving through my chest. My sentences were slow, and I chose each word carefully, afraid of making mistakes. Sometimes I paused in the middle of a sentence because I suddenly forgot the vocabulary I needed. In those moments, a familiar voice in my mind whispered that maybe I should not be there. But then something surprising happened. No one laughed. Instead, people listened patiently. Some participants nodded encouragingly as I spoke. Others smiled, as if they understood exactly how difficult it could be to express thoughts in a second language. I quickly realized that many of them were experiencing the same challenges I was. Some of them made grammar mistakes. Some paused for long moments while searching for the right word. Some even asked the group for help when they were unsure how to continue a sentence. And slowly, the tension that had filled the room began to disappear. The conversation became easier. The atmosphere felt less like a test and more like a shared journey of learning. Instead of trying to sound perfect, people simply tried to communicate. By the end of the meeting, I realized something simple but powerful. Everyone there was learning. No one expected perfection. That realization changed the way I felt about the experience. Week after week, I continued attending those meetings. At first, my progress was slow. I still hesitated, and sometimes I still struggled to find the right words. But each time I spoke, the fear became slightly smaller. Gradually, speaking English stopped feeling like a performance and started feeling like a conversation. Little by little, I began sharing more. I told small stories about my daily life. I asked questions about other people's cultures and experiences. I listened to participants from different countries describe their cities, their traditions, and their personal journeys of learning English. Through those conversations, the world suddenly felt larger and more connected than it had before. Sometimes the meetings were serious and thoughtful, while other times they were light and filled with laughter. What mattered most was the sense of openness. Everyone there understood that mistakes were not failures. They were simply part of learning. One evening, After a particularly enjoyable conversation, I closed my laptop and sat quietly in my chair. The room was calm, and the soft light from the desk lamp filled the space around me. As I reflected on the conversation we had just shared, a feeling appeared that I had not experienced in a long time: excitement. It was not the loud excitement of celebration or achievement. It was quieter than that. It was the calm, steady excitement that comes from growth, the feeling that something inside you is slowly expanding. Learning something new reminded me of the curiosity I had felt as a child. Each conversation opened a small window to a wider world. Every new phrase, every new connection, and every new story I heard from another participant made the world feel more alive and more interesting. Gradually, I began to realize something important. The experience was not just about learning English. It was about reconnecting with the version of myself who once loved exploring new possibilities. Months passed, and the changes in my life remained quiet but deeply meaningful. Nothing about my life had transformed dramatically from the outside. I still woke up early each morning, prepared for work, and followed the familiar rhythm of my daily responsibilities. My job remained the same, my schedule remained structured, and many parts of my routine looked exactly as they had before. If someone had observed my life from a distance, they might not have noticed anything different at all. But inside me, something had slowly shifted. I felt more present in my own life before. Many of my days had passed almost automatically. I moved from one task to another, from one responsibility to the next, rarely pausing long enough to notice how I truly felt. Life often felt like a long list of obligations that needed to be completed. But now, something about my awareness had changed. I began paying attention to small moments that I once ignored. The quiet morning light entering my apartment, the simple pleasure of finishing a meaningful conversation, the calm feeling that appeared when I allowed myself to slow down and reflect. Instead of moving automatically through routines, I began making small choices with intention. I asked myself simple questions that I had avoided for years. What would make today feel meaningful? What small action might bring curiosity back into my life? Those questions did not lead to dramatic decisions, but they slowly reshaped the way I moved through each day. One of the first things I did was travel alone for the first time. It was not a long journey or an expensive adventure. I simply visited a nearby country for a few days. In the past, the idea of traveling alone would have made me uncomfortable. I would have worried about planning mistakes, unfamiliar places, or the uncertainty of navigating a new environment by myself. But this time, I felt a quiet excitement instead of fear. Walking through unfamiliar streets, hearing different languages around me, and observing the rhythms of another culture reminded me of something I had once loved deeply: the feeling of discovering something new at the same time. I continued practicing English conversations every week. What had once felt intimidating slowly became something I looked forward to. Each meeting offered a chance to connect with people from different countries and backgrounds. Through those conversations, I learned not only new vocabulary, but also new perspectives about life, culture, and human experience. Sometimes the discussions were simple and lighthearted, while other times they touched on deeper subjects about dreams, fears, and personal growth. With each conversation, my confidence grew, and the world felt a little larger. Alongside these experiences, I also began writing short reflections about my days. In the evenings, after finishing my work and conversations, I opened a small notebook and wrote about what I had noticed or learned. At first, the entries were short and simple. Sometimes I described a meaningful conversation. Sometimes I wrote about a thought that appeared during a quiet walk. Over time, those reflections became a way for me to understand myself more clearly. Writing allowed me to slow down and observe the subtle changes happening within me. None of these changes were dramatic or extraordinary. I did not suddenly transform my entire life. I did not quit my job or move to another country or begin some grand adventure, but together, these small choices created a feeling I had not experienced in many years. My life felt alive again. It was not the excitement of constant activity or dramatic success. Instead, it was a quieter kind of aliveness, the feeling that each day contained possibilities worth noticing. I began to feel more connected to my own experiences, more aware of the present moment, and more curious about what might come next. One evening, many months after the day I first opened that small box, I returned to it again. The box was still resting in the same cabinet where I had placed it before. For a moment, I hesitated before opening it, almost as if I were greeting an old friend. When I lifted the lid, the familiar objects were still there: the notebooks, the ticket stubs, the letters, and at the bottom, the photograph. I took the picture out and looked at it once more. The child in the photo had not changed, of course. His hair was still messy, his small toy airplane still rested in his hands, and his eyes still carried that same curious energy that had captured my attention months earlier. But this time, when I looked at him, I felt something different: gratitude, because that child had reminded me of something I had almost forgotten. Life is not only about stability and responsibility. Those things matter, of course, and they help create a foundation for our lives. But life is also about exploration. It is about learning new things, connecting with people beyond our familiar circles, and allowing ourselves to grow beyond the limits we once believed were permanent. The child in that photograph had understood something I had slowly forgotten as an adult. The world is full of possibilities waiting to be explored. I placed the photograph back into the box carefully, but before closing the lid, I paused for a moment and looked at the image one last time. The quiet room around me felt peaceful, and a small smile appeared on my face. Then I whispered something softly. "I'm still learning," I said, and in that moment I realized something comforting. The curious child from the photograph had never truly disappeared. He had simply been waiting patiently for me to listen again. For years, the noise of routine and responsibility had made his voice difficult to hear. But once I allowed space for curiosity to return, that voice became clear again, and now that I had finally heard him, the future felt open in a way it had not felt for many years. Not perfect, not certain, but full of possibility. And sometimes, possibility is the most beautiful beginning of all. Before we finish tonight's story, I want you to pause for just a moment. Think again about that photograph from the beginning, the child you once were, the child who believed the world was wide and full of possibilities. That child may have felt misunderstood. Maybe they felt alone. Maybe they learned to stay quieto, feel safe, But here is something important to remember. That child never disappeared. They simply waited. Waited for someone to listen. Waited for someone to protect them. Waited for someone to say, I'm here now. And perhaps that someone is you. If this story spoke to you tonight, take one small moment before you leave this video. Ask yourself a gentle question. What is one small thing I can do tomorrow to take care of myself a little better than yesterday? It does not have to be something big, just one honest moment, one kind decision, one quiet step forward. And if you would like to continue this journey of reflection and English listening through storytelling, you can stay here with me. More stories are waiting for you. Until then, take care of yourself. And remember, sometimes the person we spend our whole life searching for is the person we are slowly becoming.